Welcome, everyone, to the ExitStrategy.World podcast, or webcast number 4, I should say, with Michael Garfield. Today, we'll be discussing artificial intelligence, how it's going to impact education, and therefore how it's going to affect offshoring as it relates to parents who want to go offshore, move outside the United States or Canada, and they want to homeschool their kids. Can AI be a tool that can help with that process? And we can get into some other things as to how AI is affecting everything from hiring to podcasting to many other industries that are of interest to Michael. As we were introduced to each other, I think it was last year, wasn't it, Michael?
Yeah.
Yeah, by a mutual acquaintance who was starting an AI startup in Dubai, if I remember correctly, which I hope is doing well. I haven't heard anything from that guy in many months, but the main reason is I wanted to have you on, like I said, was because of your podcasting expertise. You are the founder of Future Fossils LLC. I believe it was your own company. You started over 20 years ago, right?
Well, Future Fossils proper was a podcast that started in 2016, and I didn't actually incorporate until last year.
But you've been doing podcasts for almost 2 decades now.
Yeah, I've been mixed up in podcasting as well as other forms of public discussion and interview and keynote speaking and talking in front of people for a very long time.
It's what you do, and you do it very well, and you've done it professionally for a number of organizations as well as a professional podcaster. I mean, with both nonprofits and for-profit corporations, correct?
Yeah, and but it's in the institutional environment. It has taken some work to compel administration to understand the true value of this format lies not at least exclusively or perhaps even primarily in amplifying the brand story or that sort of first layer. Oh, we can stand in this tree with 100 other screaming birds and be heard. It's not it's what is actually going on, as far as I'm concerned, and the real value of the podcast to collective intelligence or collective sense making is in the medium itself as an instrument for allowing people to engage in the process of intellectual discovery in real time, and then to participate in that kind of intimately, even as just a third party listener. That there is it's different. Like the average book is something that someone has thought about and polished and crystallized, and it's like a peer-reviewed scientific paper exists at one point in this knowledge cycle, and what complexity science calls high temperature search, high temperature research, noisy creative thought exists over here in this sort of more casual format of a podcast done really well, in my opinion, is like a dinner table conversation, right? So that's, I don't know why I felt the need to stress that, but yeah. And you're muted.
Sorry, could you hear me?
Nope.
It looks like I was muted. I was saying that I was comparing Joe Rogan not to a professor, but maybe like to a TA. His guests are the professors, maybe some of them.
Yeah, I mean, there's curation has become an enormous part of our lives, and to sort of jump the gun on this conversation, that's why I have stressed thinking about the function of AI models in the modern media landscape and, or the contemporary media landscape as being one that is about amplifying this curatorial function, that like transdisciplinary artist and musician Brian Eno said in an interview with Kevin Kelly at Wired magazine in 1995 that the 21st century will be one in which curation becomes an ever more obvious and important artistic form. And that's because we all live in these networks now, and networks generate novelty and information exponentially. And so, how to sift through the superfluous, this avalanche of new information, and how to bring it back down, how to compress it into something that we can understand at our level as human beings is, what these mechanized statistical inference machine, like these processes are doing for us. It's pattern recognition at scale.
Right. I mean, that is what AI is. It's pattern recognition at scale. It's pattern recognition sped up to warp speed for the most advanced ones. And I like that you mentioned Brian Eno, because I was, for some reason, before we started recording, I was thinking about Dune and this whole topic of, the second movie came out, and, there's a lot of people that loved it. There were a lot of people that hated it, primarily because of the Chani storyline being different from the novel. They kind of made her more of a modern woman for the plot line. But I think one of the biggest themes of Dune as a novel is education and pedagogy, and the idea of training and honing human beings to where they can, they can achieve almost superhuman level things. And in fact, many of the characters are basically superhuman. And that's sort of where, like, Star Wars kind of ripped that off with the Force and everything. But there's no Force in Dune. It's just sort of this, not a space opera, but more of a space epic fantasy, if you will. And I think of it, there's been a lot of discussions on X in particular about it. I think you have the Tolkien nerds and you have kind of the Dune nerds, and they sort of overlap on X. But the reason I bring that up, like I said, is because it's about great houses, bloodlines, nobility, all these sort of themes that in our, let's say, radical leveler age, although radical leveling is more of a tool that elites use to suppress competition, I would argue. But in this sort of age of forced egalitarianism, and some would say forced mediocrity, Dune is sort of provocative because it suggests that there is an elite or a meritocratic elite that can take charge, that can actually, drive the vast changes in human society over, vast periods of time. And yet there's, it's a warning against the cult of the leader as well. I mean, especially the second novel that's going to be made by Denis Villeneuve is a tragedy, Dune Messiah, right? So, like, we've had the hero's journey and the triumph over the brutal Harkonnens, and they didn't have heart plugs in this one, like in the David Lynch version, but they turned the Harkonnens sort of into these weird, ghost people with North Korean style, military parades and stuff like that. And, I mean, that's obviously Villeneuve's spin on it. And, he's certainly entitled to, I think, emphasize the characters, the Fremen characters, being more Arabesque or descendants of Arabs, even tens of thousands of years into the future, because that certainly doesn't differ from, I think, Herbert's vision. But again, it's interesting that it re-sparks a discussion of where we're going as a species, and also what is the role of education and what is the role of artificial intelligence. I mean, I hope they do. I know they've got a series out called Sisterhood. I haven't even watched the trailer for yet. That's set 10,000 years preceding the birth of Paul Atreides and the whole start of the Dune saga. But I'm really hoping that they'll do the Butlerian Jihad as well, because That's where I was going with this, because we were talking about artificial intelligence. I'm trying to bring it back after kind of rambling a bit to this idea, the commandment of the Orange Catholic Bible that Herbert talks about as a sort of syncretic Chrislam, if you will, tens of thousands of years in the future. The main commandment is, thou shalt not make a machine in the likeness of a human mind, right? Thou shalt not make a machine in the likeness of a human mind. That's like the number one commandment after the jihad. And I'm wondering, people are afraid AI is going to take their jobs. People are afraid that AI is going to lead to mass redundancy, and maybe even starting with a lot of the people who are, in more repetitive or lower wage positions, like let's say low wage white collar work overseas, call centers in India, call centers in Philippines, and yet some of the people overseas are way ahead of Americans when it comes to really adapting this stuff faster. I mean, I've definitely noticed that it seems like the British, Canadian, some of these agencies I see, they're adapting AI faster than some of the more fat and happy agencies here on the marketing side in this country. And also just, I had a conversation many weeks ago now with an attorney in Mexico City. And after I quoted him on the ExitStrategy.World Patreon, and he talked about how AI is going to basically be this tsunami that's going to wipe a lot of stuff out in the current offshoring space, in the sense of people who are, geo arbitrage, passport bros who go down to Mexico, they go down to the DR, they're doing remote work. And these companies, their companies are trying to force them to return to the office to justify their office leases. The whole office industry is basically imploding, at least the part that's owned by the regional banks, that's not in the, in Washington, D.C. area with the federal government to prop it up. And second, you've got this, the AI is replacing appointment setters, which was another, let's say, overseas position people were doing. It can replace some of the functions of a virtual assistant, of a VA, right? Or at least it can help your VA be more productive. So you don't maybe need two, you just need one if you've got a lot of stuff to do, spreadsheets and things like that. And then three, which maybe nobody's talking about yet, and that's what I wanted to bring up on this webcast and get your take on it, because you probably there in New Mexico, you either know or have known some homeschooling parents. One of the biggest obstacles to going abroad, if you're, a professional, particularly entering middle age, you got responsibilities, you're not a young guy anymore, just take your laptop and one bag and go, is education, right? How are you going to educate your children, right? I mean, if you're going to Mexico and you've got Mexico City and Monterrey, the major cities, Guadalajara, you've got Catholic schools, English language schools. But what if you want to move to, I don't know, Honduras, right? To what's that island off there? I'm thinking of the special economic zone of Honduras. Or what if you want to go to El Salvador, right? Is there going to be an English language school? Yeah, maybe in San Salvador. But if you're living in Bitcoin Beach and you're taking your kids there, is there going to be? Or are you going to need to find other homeschooling parents and get with them and pool resources and maybe, have like a rotation or a circle of tutors you can call on to help your child, not only with Spanish, but with, mathematics or with, geography, whatever it may be, the subject, right? And then where does AI come into that picture? Could AI, super empower the homeschooling parents so that they don't even have to be in the United States? I mean, if they're earning income from abroad, they're earning income in North America while being in Latin America. Could it be a really helpful tool, in your opinion?
Well, there's a lot there. I feel like I tried to note in mind about half a dozen bullet points. I wanted
let me narrow it down for you.
Well, hold on.
Actually,
it's good. It's rich. If you don't mind, let me see if I can
unpack it where you please, Michael.
Find a way to hit them all. So, okay. So, first of all, expat, UK expat Damian Walter, who I forget if he lives in Thailand or I think he lives in Bali, Indonesia. Yeah. He's got some great stuff on his YouTube channel, the Science Fiction Podcast YouTube channel, on Dune and on the Butlerian jihad and on Dune's mythic structure. As you know, it's like he does like a Jungian analysis. It's great stuff. He talks about the different presentations of the Harkonnen and so on. Anyway, bookmark that for late night enjoyment. Then there's also this question that you're talking about in the broader questions about the economic impact of AI and the you know what we keep seeing, which Damien speaks to in some of his stuff in science fiction, where we've made it into this remarkably advanced spacefaring future, but we have not managed to escape uh you know the enormous monolithic authoritarian like powerful dynasties that conquer entire planets or systems. There's this question about how many times we can continue to make the same mistakes at higher and higher levels of complexity, or in what ways some of the patterns, the phenomena, the more sort of even-handed, modern, humanitarian, democratic kind of thinking tends to ignore, the meritocratic rhetoric of the modern West, ignores what in complex system science is inescapable, which are statistical distributions and the fact that power will always be distributed unevenly. And actually,
And
there are
wealth too.
reasons.
And
There are
wealth.
reasons for this. There are good reasons why. Not to be an apologist for abuses of power, which I am definitely not, and I'm not saying this, but um, we can see in events like COVID and the cascading bank failures of 2008 and 9, the way that trying to make everything equivalent to everything else, trying to connect every part of the planet to every other part of the planet, creates these cascading collapse events.
Failures.
Yes,
Fragility instead of
enormous
versus
catastrophic
anti-fragility. You're talking about Nicholas Still's 1990
fractal
fragility.
sand pile collapse type failures. And in the intelligence of living systems, structural hierarchy, like modularity and like the fractal branching of biophysical transport networks, like the circulatory system in the body, like your capillaries are thinner by designoid process than your aorta for a reason. And the reason is that this is the way that we address the issues of friction and other kind of energy concerns in circulating nutrients through the body. So there are so at any rate, it's an interesting question to start thinking about equality and equivalence, which are not the same thing, and where it is and is not appropriate to have uneven distributions of power or so on, not as not on one or other extreme of a very complex conversation, but the question of like, well, what are the actual design constraints within which we can arrive at like a healthy expression? And this matters with the issue of AI for a number of reasons. Like, you can't separate the question of labor markets and of technological innovation and so on. You can't separate capitalism from power, right? This is
Right. And it's also a
capital
question of
is
whose
leverage,
ox is being gored, because there are a lot of
right?
people in political, let's say, of a certain political persuasion who didn't really give a shit when it was a factory shutting down up the street, when the jobs were being shipped to Mexico and then China. But now that there's AI lawyers, or at least there's AI, legal, there's AI systems, and we're going to be interviewing somebody with an AI startup, Legalmente, who's based in San Antonio, Texas, a Latino entrepreneur, in the coming weeks. But just had to get that quick plug in. But when you're talking about AI lawyers, when AI is starting to actually hammer white collar work before, in many respects, blue collar work, then the class, let's say, system that we don't talk about in this country, we say we're a classless society, but we're not. It gets shaken up in an unexpected way that, a plumber is making more than, a junior associate. An electrician is making more than a, maybe even, what do you call it? The people who read the x-rays, thinking of,
Yeah.
because that's a job.
Radiologist.
Why? Because that job, the electrician and plumber job, cannot be outsourced, nor is the AI and robotics advanced enough to do their job. Whereas the medical, the CT scans examiner, that can be outsourced to somebody in the Philippines, or that could at least be accelerated, if not replaced, by an AI that enhances the reviewing process of once you have a CT scan or you have an X-ray or you have something, a 3D image of the human body that's been scanned. So like this is a fascinating to me because, it's like old Bob Dylan saying, the loser now is later to win, and the times are changing. And I think about that in terms of the internationalization and offshoring industry, where there's kind of this stigma still that people try to attach to it, especially for single men, especially for divorced single men. Oh, you're just a passport bro who's just trying to, take advantage of your white man privilege and go to some Latin American country where there are women who are poorer, and, and you pretend that they're more feminine, and they pretend like they like you as super a lot. But the reality, that's a dark and cynical view of it. But the reality is, I mean, yes, there is a lot of that going on in places like Thailand and Colombia in particular, but there's also, I mean, it's a way for people to reinvent themselves. It's an escape hatch, just like people used to talk about mass immigration of people from Mexico as a safety valve for Mexican society. That people used to say things like, well, if you didn't have millions of Mexicans going north, or if they couldn't go north, like in the 90s and 2000s, then Mexico would have just exploded in another revolution. Like some people said that to me. And I'm not vouching for that. I'm not saying I necessarily agree with that. But on the other hand, what about the idea of offshoring and people internationalizing their lives as an escape hatch for the United States here 20, 30 years later? Because otherwise, a hell of a lot of retirees wouldn't be able to afford to eat if they couldn't take their Social Security and go south of the border with it, right, in the coming years. Number one.
Yeah.
Number two, you also are changing up who's elite and who's not, because you can't afford an elite school as a parent, but you can afford to give your child, especially with the AI education tools that are coming, a heck of a better education than what would have been remotely possible in the United States because of the income, the geo arbitrage of income in, say, Mexico City versus Los Angeles, right? I mean, you could afford to send, as opposed to sending your kid to some crappy Los Angeles public school, you could send them to one of the best schools in Mexico City. Or even if you're not in Mexico City, if you're further out somewhere, like the Amish or the Mormons in Mexico, you've got AI tools to enhance your homeschooling team, as it were, in your community. So go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, no, there's a lot there. And I'm not sure how capable I will be of replying to.
Well, it's a general basic idea
before.
of revolutionary, like that the AI is turning the wheel. It's not only turning the wheel faster of society, but it's turning who are the winners and who are the losers around in a less expected way than, let's say, what we were expecting when you and I were growing up in the late 80s or 90s, and the way we were taught of go to school, get a job, get a white collar job, get a degree, get an advanced degree if you can, a master's, and live happily ever after and be able to afford to own a house, and all those things that are so broken now, all those ideas that have broken down.
So I want to speak to that in particular, and then we can see if we can find a way to angle this back into the questions that you asked earlier about education and unschooling and so on, homeschooling. I want to speak very generally to evolutionary dynamics as they appear in much more kind of fundamental process we can call offshoring for the purposes of this conversation,
Yeah.
which is that in stable, mature ecosystems, competition for resources in crowded ecologies
Right.
is very, very pitched. It's very
It's
intense.
Peter Turchin's overproduction of elites, right? And especially in the late Roman Empire, and that's like
Yeah,
he
yeah.
focuses on that
Although
time.
it's what I want to say is a little bit more general than that. Like in a rainforest, you have thousands of species of pollinators, each of which has found its flower. It's one thing that it lives on,
A
or that
niche
it helps to
in the
pollinate.
ecosystem.
And in a city, similarly, in a modern megalopolis, you have people that have these incredibly narrowly specified economic opportunities. You have these, like the quote unquote gig economy exists because of this ongoing turning of this ratchet, whereby ever more dis, narrowly specified uh opportunities, like open up a store for, like, physicist Jeffrey West gives the example of in Manhattan, the store that only sells chess pieces. Like these kinds of things become possible, but
Doggy daycares, but yeah.
but the I think there's this article that you sent me the other day about what is the appeal of the so-called third world. What is the
Right, Dark
why do
Futura.
people
That was
keep
from the Dark Futura
leaving?
side, which I'm sorry to interrupt, but I didn't want to interrupt your train of thought. But we had our very first ESW webcast about a Dark Futura article. It was with Isaac Simpson, who owns an agency out in Los Angeles, a marketing agency, who happens to be more for the right of center, or so-called dissident right. But it's really more, I would say, not the dissident right, but the aesthetic right that he kind of appeals to. The people that are like building off the fumes of 70s, 80s, 90s nostalgia, almost. That's a whole nother topic. But you were saying, yes, I sent you the article about the appeal of the third world. So what did you think of that article?
Yeah, well, so the question of why people leave the security theater spectacle of hyper risk averse, self imprisoning kind of advanced technological states like the United States or like the UK,
Or Canada?
for uh, life in these places where there is far less infrastructure, there's far less political stability, in the sense that we can regard, a maladaptive system that's nonetheless stable in its maladaptive attractor. Um, what is it about this, being called out of comfort and into creativity and adventure and risk and discovery and so on? And I was just talking with Tom Morgan for Future Fossils, and Tom has spent most of his life in finance. He recently left his job writing a column on thinking outside the box in investment for Sapient Capital, as a strategic director at Sapient, to go pursue his own media product and community offerings around helping, what I do with Future Fossils, and what a lot of people I know do with their own projects, which is to help people make sense of transition. And so when I talk about the mature ecosystem, uh, in a sense, you can think of these, uh, you know, there being a sort of a high water mark where everything in that system is hyper specialized, and there's a sense in which hyper specialization is equivalent to offshoring, in that if someone else is doing it, I don't have to. And so these are, in general, like this, the picture you're describing is one in which, uh, on average, in the sense that evolution proceeds through what, uh, Eldridge and others called punctuated equilibrium, long periods of relative stability, punctuated by moments of sort of cascading or
The
epochal
asteroid
change.
wiping out the dinosaurs, for example.
Yeah. Although that's uh, often that change is generated internally, like the bank collapses of 2009. That's
Or the
not a
fall of the Soviet
meteor.
Union is like Peter Turchin and
That's
others
instability, right?
Yeah.
Turchin's work talks about this a lot. That's instability
Yeah.
generated by the system becoming so uh, dependent on the conveniences created, that are preferred to by economies of scale, just-in-time supply chains. Where if you get a ship lodged sideways in the Suez Canal, the whole global economy grinds to a halt. These kinds of things where there's choke points everywhere.
Yeah.
In the
I was half jokingly, but I wasn't really seriously comparing the Houthis to the scenes in Lynch's Dune, where they're blowing up all the spice production, and Paul's saying all eyes will have to turn to Arrakis, and the Baron and the Emperor himself will have to deal with us, and how they're screwing up the Red Sea and its harassment and the ships. Yes, the ships can take the long way around Africa, and it's not catastrophic. It's really bad for Egypt. I mean, like to the point that it's going to lead some real hardship for people whose livelihoods depend on the Suez. But it's not like catastrophic in the sense like that, you know, what let's call them network tribes or global guerrillas. I think John Robb uses the term global guerrillas, the damage that they're capable of doing if they were to inflict greater damage. I mean, on the one hand, it's sort of comforting that, you can have two states, bombing the hell out of each other's oil and gas infrastructure, and yet, the price of oil in Russia and Ukraine, like I guess Iran, Iraq did it a little bit too in the 80s, but without drones. They had Scud missiles or something, and conventional bombs dropped from planes. But I mean, it's comforting that the system is proving to be more robust than people perhaps thought in certain respects. But in other respects, maybe I would argue cognitively, I think people are much weaker than they were during the last Cold War. I mean, you have people who are like, the EU is always trying to, shut down certain channels and shut down what they call, propaganda from the other side or whatever. And it's like, during the last Cold War, did we try to shut down, Radio Moscow? Did we have jammers on our side, or was it their side that was jamming, the Voice of America and RFAE, RL, and et cetera? I mean, I didn't mean to get off on that tangent, but I mean, I think Frank Herbert talks a lot about this too, that societies get so overgrown and overly complex, and the bureaucratic, in his novel, to bring it back full circle to what we were talking about earlier, you have an extreme rigidity of power. You have groups that have basically been in business or been operating for 10,000 years, like the Bene Gesserit. And you've got Chom and the Spacing Guild, basically the Bene Gesserit and the Spacing Guild. And they're like this sort of four-sided or even, polygonal power structure. And then Paul Atreides, something they didn't expect, comes along and blows it all up to a degree. I mean, ultimately, even he, being a super being, with a super mind, couldn't take down the system himself. It was kind of his son who ends up radically altering it later on in the novels. I'm not going to give away the spoilers, but and the successors to his son, I should say, the physical descendants, but not of the Atreides line, but not not even Paul Atreides himself could take down the system. He could only kind of alter it to a degree after billions of people die basically around the galaxy. So like I think the message Herbert's trying to send there is that we have to change. Humans can get too rigid, too enslaved, and too trapped by systems, by bureaucracies, by Chom, this galactic mega corporation that's kind of like, the Amazon of 10, 20,000 years in the future, that has sort of become a blob that absorbs everything. But we have to find a way to free ourselves without falling prey to overly charismatic leaders, without falling prey to messianic thinking, I think is the main message of the book.
Well, far be it from me to be the one who has to depart so completely from my normal being and actually bring this back down to the ground.
Definitely. Please do.
To keep it integrated. Like normally I'm the one off there.
Highfalutin ideas.
But in order to make sure I actually do answer the questions that you asked me, I want to say everything that you're just talking about now is part of why AI, as people are currently mostly conceiving of it and mostly interacting with it, is not going to give people the kind of opportunities that you alluded to in your initial question bouquet. And and part
You
of
mean
that
to
is,
educate, to be as a kind of super empower homeschooling, you mean?
well, yeah. So I mean, that's part of it. And another part is, okay. So there's a lot. I mean, let me see. First of all, your point about the South Park episode in which general contractors become the wealthy ones and all the white collar folks are like standing outside Home Depot trying to get work.
Yeah,
This is a transient state.
sure. Because elites are
And
always going to reassert themselves.
yeah, but I mean,
Even
but it
after
is
the communist revolutions in Russia and China, like an elite always
right.
reemerges.
Well, well, yes and no. The horse and carriage world did not reassert itself after the car.
Yeah,
But we have, what we are seeing is a very will be regarded by the future as a canonical example of what Austrian economist Joseph Schumpeter called creative destruction,
yeah,
right? Where what we're seeing is something akin to one of these punctuations where, in this case, endogenous, like internally generated novelty, by a lot of which is, people who value disruption itself, disruption for disruption's sake, as a way of liberating stored calories, capital, as a way of creating capital opportunity in a mature economy. What Naomi Klein called the shock doctrine
yeah.
capitalism, where there's no frontier, so we're blowing things up so that we have something to rebuild.
Right.
And a lot of
Russia in the 90s is sort of the archetypal example.
right, so
Some
we're in
people
this
argue
point
Argentina
where
did it too. Yeah.
uh, the biggest opportunity, the biggest money opportunity right now is in bulk data collection, where basically the OpenAI approach of just steal and then ask for forgiveness while you're selling people back to them. And but what they're doing in another more subtle way is even kind of more horrible, which is uh, claiming to empower each of us as individuals while merely basically turning up the heat on rivalrous productivity arms race, where it's like, okay, everyone's going to be using chat GPT to 10x their productivity in a system in which everyone is already time and attention poor.
Yes.
And the consequences of this are that we're seeing a moment where the calculus, the evolutionary math, now favors generalist strategies over specialist strategies in many important cases.
Yes.
And so you can talk about this broadly as like, in times of peace, you don't really need to diversify your portfolio, right? And
Yeah.
now
You don't need gold and silver, and you can just hey, it's the 90s. Your stocks are doing great, man. Or it's pre-housing, housing
yeah,
bubble.
and so like
2000.
in these, you don't need without comment on specific asset classes, like you didn't need to think when things were stable, and
Yeah.
now you need to think, but it just happens that
And
this is
thinking is hard,
that
Michael. Thinking
thinking
is
is
hard.
hard,
It
and
burns calories.
that the tools that are being offered to us as a way of managing this complexity do something really generally bad for this kind of thing, which is that they provide us, Gemini and Chat GPT and these other modern
It's not even that they're
implementations.
woke. It's that they dumb you down. because
Well,
they're dumbing it down to the lowest common denominator.
well, okay. So there's the problem of automating the wrong thing, but there's another problem, which is the fact that these are trained on data sets that are so large that the answers that they're giving you personally for your context, it's like about as useful as a photograph from space of your neighborhood when you're trying to, get around on
Right.
foot. And,
Yeah.
and they tend towards the average. So like actually what they're doing is they're deforming the decision-making and sense-making landscape of human interaction and dragging us all down in ways that, like Scott Alexander in his writing on Meditations on Moloch and others have noted that this kind of thing is creating a strong incentive to race to the bottom, to the lowest common denominator, and destroying all of the it's actively erasing diversity around the edges of this thing. So like, to make it really concrete, it may look right now like it's a more stable thing for you to do the kind of work that robots will for sure be doing in 5 years.
Yeah.
Building your house and this kind of thing.
Yeah.
But it's rather than, make concrete predictions about what kind of jobs are going to survive here, I'm going to make a sort of meta-strategic prediction, which is that until such time as this all shakes out in decades from now, that it helps to remain limber and diversified, and that it helps to adopt a kind of more humble and curious and frankly noisier, more playful approach. And this is something I've tried to embody in my work, as my own career has been repeatedly disrupted by technological innovations that are foisted upon us by one insane sociopathic multi-billionaire after another.
And COVID.
And
that was a big killer.
And the downstream consequences of the regulatory capture and the distortion of human social interaction and infrastructure around their machinations, which is, no matter what you think about the origin story of COVID, there's no question that COVID is because of human decisions that are made in conjunction with downward institutional pressure. Anyway, what does this all mean in terms of like homeschooling your kids on a beach in Mexico or whatever, Honduras?
That's where we started.
Yeah, what this means is a couple things. One, well, first of all, it'll be easy. I mean, it's already totally doable to send your kid to a school where they're not speaking the language and expect machines to do a passable job at translating this up to a point. Your kid's going to be at a disadvantage from native speakers, there's no question, but the machines are going to get you better at like actually being able to learn the language if you manage to stay like on the what Nicholas Carr in The Glass Cage talks about, sort of like healthy versus unhealthy forms of automation. And healthy forms are forms that allow you to develop capacity. They're not machines. They're not offshoring your own cognition into some sort of opaque, mysterious, outboard machine brain that somebody else owns. So a lot of the future of AI, in healthy ways that I see it, is going to be about models that are trained on smaller, more local data sets that are more pertinent to you and your life and your concerns, and are able to speak to you as a singular instance of something that the world is doing, and run offline on hardware and software that you can trust. rather than increasing these catastrophic or at least extremely fragile dependencies on a system that we're increasingly coming to understand as, uh,
The Five
as
Eyes cloud dystopia blob absorbing everything.
yeah, like basically, there was another thing I wanted to say, which is like basically like AI is really not a distinct technology from the corporation. The corporation is a material reallocation optimization function running on statistical patterns. Like you can think about, buying stocks in a company as basically participating in a large transformer that's training on behavioral data from everyone else buying stocks,
Right.
and so or buying product. And so really like what we're seeing is not different in kind from the problems we've been experiencing over the last several hundred years, or like at least, like 200 years. And, uh, and so exit from this kind of a thing is, it's a nice sort of aspiration. It's also not entirely realistic. The questions, it's a highly multidimensional question. And, people are going to be persuaded rather perniciously and ubiquitously to make decisions that place us in positions of ever more, uh, ever greater vulnerability and dependency and so on. And frankly, buying gold is not going to get you away from that. Leaving
Well,
the
no, I mean,
country
by
is not
itself,
going to get you away from that.
yeah, by itself, it certainly won't. I mean, just if it, and we talk about this all the time. You can't expect just to buy some gold, stash it in your safe, and live out in the boonies in the middle of nowhere, and everybody's just going to leave you alone. I mean, certainly part of why we created ExitStrategy.World was we wanted to reach the people who might otherwise be tempted just to go into internal exile and just withdraw and say, no, there's an alternative to that, which is you can join another community, just like your ancestors got on a boat in Europe and crossed it and set up a new community in a new country, in a new frontier, maybe even a place they didn't know a lot about. And, you could do something similar in the 21st century, especially because technology allows you to keep in touch with the people, back home. But that being said, there is still the question of, being a satellite gringo and sort of just being, off on your own and not getting to know your neighbors and not getting a lot of things going. So, yeah, well, looks like we're at time. And we got to have you back on, Michael, in probably a few weeks, and we'll definitely have a little more time, maybe an hour, a full hour and a half format, because I really appreciate you bringing things back to the concrete. I think this has sort of been a full circle discussion. I didn't mean to make it sort of in this too high of an arc, but I did want to throw a lot of ideas at the wall and see which ones stick in the hour that we had, so that we could sort of set up for the next more in-depth conversation.
Yeah,
That was
let's
my
call it part
objective.
one. That's
Let's call it part one.
that's
Yeah.
totally reasonable. Folks, you're going to be just dissatisfied with half baked answers to really big, complicated questions. But yeah, I want to thank you for having me on, and I look forward to being back. And also, I would love to talk to people specifically, because the last thing, the point I was trying to get to is that,
Yeah. To wrap up, you want to wrap up?
that human factor stuff is not going away anytime soon. That quote unquote soft skills, that the ability to make sense of things that are going on for other people and for systems generally is going to remain of crucial importance, especially as information becomes more and more challenging to navigate due to these sort of scaling law dynamics. And that what this means in the most concrete sense is that I don't think that it's a very resilient or anti-fragile solution in the long term to let AI tutor your kids or to, to make the decisions for your corporation, or, I think that coaches and consultants and advisors and counselors are going to continue to be of crucial importance for the foreseeable future. And I have a lot more to say, and I'm glad we get a chance to soon, about the design space, the decision-making space within which you're plunking all of these geopolitical and economic concerns. And I would love to talk with people about this. And if you're listening to this, you are warmly invited to reach out to me. I am available for consulting, and I have very, very deep archives of online discussion to which I am happy to point people if you come to me with specific questions about the stuff that you're facing in your life. So let's find better questions to help you navigate the absurd superabundance of other people's proposed answers to your problem as they see it. Right?
Amen to that. And like I said, folks, Michael Garfield is, as it says on his LinkedIn profile, super open to work. So please reach out to him via LinkedIn. And you can also find him on X, and DMs are open for serious consulting inquiries. If you need a professional podcaster, somebody who can be highly relatable, who's been there, done it, got the t-shirts for many companies, many nonprofits, and many startups, please do reach out to Michael Garfield, and we will certainly have him back on in the next several weeks. So he's got to run, go pick up his daughter, I believe, from school. So let's end there. And thank you very much for your time, Michael.
Thanks a lot, man. Take care.
Goodbye.